Hello, Sabina Brennan here, host of Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. It takes just 30 seconds on Google or Apple Pay to make a one-off donation to support this show. Simply follow the Support This Show link in the show or episode description. Cheers. Hello and welcome to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. My name is Sabina Brennan, and each week I have the pleasure of chatting to guests that inspire me about thriving and surviving in life. This week, my guest is a true inspiration. Her name is Ruth Gilligan. She is an author and an academic. She wrote her first book at the age of 16 and became the youngest person ever to top the #1 bestseller list in Ireland. The Butchers, her 5th novel, was published this year. Ruth really is inspirational. She's unassuming and incredibly nice to boot. She would make any mum proud. Enjoy. I am so excited to have my next guest on the show for so many reasons. It's Ruth Gilligan, author, novelist, academic, and actually the youngest person ever to top the Irish bestsellers list. You're very welcome, Ruth.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
It is super great, actually. It's funny, so far in this podcast, and it's just happened sort of accidentally, just people that I'm interested in, there's so many of them actually have been female, Irish and authors.
We're a fascinating breed, so that doesn't surprise me.
Absolutely. But this is sort of exceptionally interesting for me. I mean, your career has been exceptional. I mean, you're only, am I right to say, and is it okay to say you're about 32?
I am indeed, right? Yes, I am.
Yeah, 32 years of age, and you have already published 5 novels. Exceptional by any standards. But your first book you wrote when you were 16.
Yeah, that feels like quite a long time ago now.
I suppose it's almost double your age.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I've now been writing for half my life. That's a good way of thinking of it.
That's pretty incredible. So tell me a little bit about that. Did you always love English? Did you like writing stories in school? I know you did it as part of a school project or something. Was that, am I misremembering that?
No, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, no, I mean, look, I guess I'd always been, I was a very kind of creative child in many ways, and speech and drama and writing and singing and playing the piano and just any possible creative outlet that I could find. But yeah, the writing was something that I'd always been into, and, writing poems and winning poetry competitions and all that kind of thing. And then basically in my school, transition year was compulsory. And one of the things that they did was that we had to do a project on anything we wanted. And we basically had the whole school year to do it. So we had about 9 months and had to be 50 pages. So people did, my classmates did anything from the Titanic to World War II to JFK, all the usuals. And I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to write a novel, and now I have a deadline in the distance. So I remember so clearly, I remember going into Dubray on Grafton Street and buying a book called How to Write a Novel. And I read it. And then I sat down and I said, right, I think I'm going to write a novel. And that was kind of it. I really genuinely thought the only person who would ever read it would be my English teacher, because she had to read it to give it a grade. And I thought that would be the end of that. But basically, Dublin being very small, like obviously my parents knew about it and they mentioned it to friends of theirs, who mentioned it to friends of theirs. And basically word got round to the one and only Patricia Scanlon, very successful writer in her own right. And
I know her, and I would love to have her on the show.
Oh my God,
actually.
you must. I mean, she is amazing. Bearing in mind, I'd never met this woman before in my life. Like, she didn't know me from Adam or from Eve. And she just rang me up one day and she said, hello there, this is Patricia Scanlon. I've read your school project and I think it's a mess, but I think you have a voice and I would like to help you edit it. So,
how kind.
Yeah, I mean, she was amazing. So I used to go around to her house and she would go through my manuscript and she would go, oh, this bit doesn't really work because, but this bit does work because, and she would kind of coach me through it. And then she sent me away with a load of edits and changes to make. And then I did all of that. And then she gave it to her publishers and they said, wow, yes, we would like to offer you a 2-book deal. So
a 2-book deal. You got a 2-book deal at 16 years.
I know. It was. I mean, by this point, I was probably 17, but yes, it was completely and all purely
16,
because,
17.
Yeah, I know. You know. And it was all because of her. Like, I still refer to her as my fairy godmother and she did it, as you said, just purely out of just kindness and generosity.
Oh, isn't it so lovely when people do things like that? I definitely will. I mean, she is on my sort of bucket list of guests, and I do know her. And I have met her personally because my own book was published by the same publisher. So we actually met sort of last summer, and I have met her at a couple of events. But that way, getting brave to ask people would they be
I mean, you can
guests
only
on the
ask.
show.
She's one of the special ones. Like, I still owe it all to her.
She's super.
Yeah,
she's super, and I love following her on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
She's super interesting and
very kind,
just very kind sort of person. Yeah, and very thoughtful. It's not about herself. She's always kind of thinking of others. So that's kind of pretty fantastic. And actually, just even listening to some of the things you said there, won poetry competitions, did this, did that. And the funny thing I was thinking when I asked you to be a guest on the show, I in the bio of this show, in the intro, I say, I speak to an eclectic mix of guests about thriving and surviving in life. And sort of many of the guests so far have overcome challenges, and it has been about overcoming challenge and how they survived and ended up thriving afterwards. And I thought, gosh, from what I knew of you, I said, this is all going to be about thriving, because just you've done so many amazing things. But then I kind of was doing some research, and it is funny, people do think that and I mean you absolutely thrive, but it sort of always will look on the outset like as if that is without challenge. And I mean, one thing that jumped out at me was there you were, and I don't know whether this is kind of typically Irish in a way, but there you were, achieving this amazing feat of, not only writing a novel, which I'm going to go back there as well, actually, because transition year is considered by so many people as such a waste, and they do all sorts of, do this, do that, because, it shows something about your maturity level or your ambition or whatever to say, well, I'm actually going to write a book. But I also totally love that you went and bought a book on how to write a book. That just sings to me. That's exactly how I do everything.
How did you know about it?
I don't know. Some people would just assume you just sit down and do it. But that's me. That's what I would do. Here I am learning how to podcast, and what do? I go and I read about, all the best ways. How do you do it? How do you set up a home studio? Having said that, I took the easy route first. I mean, I'm all for doing the podcast, but I was, I had employed a studio and used a studio, fabulous editor and all that, but needs must in the midst of COVID-19.
Of course, yeah.
But I will always do that. And I'm one for taking on challenges myself, but I'll always kind of learn from, I think maybe sometimes it comes with sort of academia, but it is that thing of standing on the shoulders of others. Other people have already learned how to do this, so you can learn from them and you build on that. And that kind of brings me sort of to another part of the reason I asked you on the show is that you were my daughter.
I was wondering when you were going to bring that up, yes.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a funny one. For listeners, the multi-talented Ruth was also an actor. I think you were about from the age of 12 or 14 we worked together.
Yeah, I was in it from the age of 12 to 16, so 4 years.
Right, okay. Yeah, you were in it longer than I was because, so to explain to listeners, I played Ruth's mother. Your character was called Laura,
I was
actually.
indeed, yeah.
And my character was called Tess, and we were mother and daughter, and it was lovely. And your character on the show was quite different to you, really, in a sense. I mean, I think your character went on to get into. Did she get into trouble going forward, or was she?
Yeah, and she's back as well, which I find that's the most hilarious.
Yeah.
I've been replaced.
Yeah, you were replaced. That's why. That's right. And is she a lesbian? Am I right?
I think apparently last time I heard that she was a lesbian gym instructor. Yeah, that was.
Okay, yeah, because there's such a mix with my family. It's so funny, right? So you were my daughter on air. I don't have any daughters in real life, and this is the reason I brought it up at this point. You'll understand me, Ruth. My conversations go all over the place. It's very much just going with the flow, and that's why I brought it up at this point, because if ever I was to have a real daughter, I mean, I would just be so proud to have you as my daughter. No, it's so lovely and so wonderful. You were so lovely to work with as a girl. You talk about actually, the fact that when you wrote your book that you were precocious. And this brings me back to what I was saying there about it not being all plain sailing. I mean, you took some rap and some nasty online stuff around that time, having written your book. I know I was reading around it, and you were referring to a blog, and I won't use the word that they refer to you with, but it's got 4 letters and it begins with a C. And you know, you came across girls in nightclubs who said nasty things to you about your book. And I mean, that's really just around, is it jealousy?
Yeah, I don't know. It's such an interesting thing to observe. And I mean, it was one thing already just being on Fair City, as I said, between the age of 12 and 16, because I was a pretty awkward teenager, and I wasn't the most aesthetically blessed teenager. So the idea of like being on national television while you're going through puberty, and also then obviously the producers decided in the wake of my mother's death that I would become my character would become a goth. So I used to go into RTE every day, and they would like smear grease in my hair and paint white on my face. And I was like, oh my God, just as I was like trying to, you know, get a boyfriend in real life, I was brilliant. Like I broadcast to the nation looking at my absolute worst. So that was like its own thing. But yeah, then as you say, like in the context of Fair City, and then a little bit later when the book first came out, it was really interesting to observe people's reactions. You know, as you said,
But you weren't just observing. I mean, you were obviously, you must have been feeling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That people would come up to you.
You can observe now and talk about it, but you're it's quite tough going through your teens anyway. And actually your 20s can be quite tough too, you know?
Absolutely. And people just, you know, I don't know what it is that people's kind of go-to reaction where they're like, oh, you're the girl from Fair City. Oh yeah, you're rubbish. Like that is just without even kind of their brain having to make a mental leap, like I'm going to be nasty now. It just rolls off the tongue. It's just the automatic thing.
It's kind of it's a fascinating thing. And, you know, it is culturally, and I know you're interested in contrasting cultures, I am too, but I do think it's a culturally specific thing. I think in other countries, if you were in different countries, you'd be, I mean, even if you take the United States, it'd be, oh my God, you're the one who wrote the novel.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, like, yeah, so it's funny. People always ask me questions like, oh, you know, did it not go to your head? You know, having been on TV and then, you know, the book and stuff, and what did that do for your confidence and your ego? And I think they always expect me to kind of say that it was a real boost. And obviously, like looking back, obviously it was amazing to kind of publish a book at that age and all that. But yeah, as you say, like wrangling, I suppose, with all of that kind of blowback. And look, I also totally acknowledge that in a way I was so lucky that it happened at the time it was now, because it was just pre-social media, you know, like I cannot fathom now
how people cope.
Yeah, and especially young people, like it's, you know, just the kind of the constant vitriol and all that. And as I said, it just seems to be many people's kind of default reactions. So yeah, even just getting stopped on Grafton Street or in a nightclub or whatever and having nasty things said to you, that was bad enough. But the idea of being kind of trolled on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I know one of our other colleagues in Fair City at that time, it was kind of a couple of years before our major storyline, but she was actually beaten up in a nightclub.
Oh my God.
Just for being, just for being, God, I can't remember her character's name. But yeah, somebody just said to her, you're such and such off Fair City. And she said, yeah. And they just laid into her girls. Yeah, mad. And I mean, of course, there was mad stories as well where people would confuse you with real characters. Remember, there was another character.
But that's like, well, I mean, that's obviously bizarre, but also.
Yeah, but this a particular nastiness. So it's, you know, it's not all great in Ireland when you are well known. I mean, I was fortunate enough I didn't have that much negativity. But you're so right in a way. I forgot that was before social media. You know, really, it was just before it. It didn't exist. And actually, my guest last week, Hilary Freeman, she is actually also a novelist, and she has written. She writes young adult, but she's also a journalist. And what we spoke about last week was the fact that she was publicly shamed online for an article that she wrote. She was exploring the conflict between the body positivity movement and trying to get health messaging out about how obesity is detrimental to your health. And she wrote that article, and I mean, it's in the entire episode. But yeah, I mean, death threats, not just to her, she laughed those off, but she had a 2-year-old 4-year-old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and people saying, hope your daughter gets cancer and dies an exceedingly slow death. Just awful stuff.
What's wrong with people?
Yeah, well, there is the thing, isn't it? It's something that fascinates me. How do people flip? I mean, obviously there's a thing called the cloak of anonymity, and you see that with trolls, but these were sort of ordinary people too, Anyway, that's kind of sidetracking, but it's a good point that you make, that at least you kind of went through it before that. But it's something that it just has to change, because it does some terrible things to people. And Caroline Flack actually comes to mind recently. Oh, just dreadful. People just really need to think before they act. There's real human beings at the other side of the screen or the other side of the Twitter profile. Yeah. But going back anyway to your career, reason why one of the reasons, obviously you love all your children, etc. But like, just having a daughter like you, you have 4 degrees, I think, at this stage. You have, and I think that's actually kind of a funny thing, really. I didn't go to university when I left school. I left school at 16, actually. So when you were writing your novel, I was working in a life assurance company. I did do my leaving cert, but I just did it very young. We didn't have transition year back then. And also I kind of had started in school relatively young. But actually, I think ultimately you and I were in university around the same time.
Amazing.
Because I went to university after I left First City and did a degree in psychology, and then got a scholarship to do a PhD. So I was you're around the same age actually as my eldest son. I think you're a year or so older. And I know he was in Trinity at the same time I was.
Oh, that's nice. That must have been fun, going to lunches.
It wasn't quite like that, but it was grand. But yes, so you went to Cambridge straight from school, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I mean, that whole kind of period around kind of the summer of 2006, I'm trying to get this in the right order. I'm pretty sure the leaving cert results came out and I got 8 A1s. And then
wow. Oh my God, let's stop for a moment. 8 A1s. Yeah, can I say this, folks, right? So when Ruth worked on Fair City, sometimes we shared dressing rooms or whatever. Your mum would have to be there because you were underage. So it was mainly your mum, I think, was your, what was the word you had to have?
Yeah.
Chaperone. But you'd be in the dressing room in between scenes doing your homework for school.
Yeah, I was a massive nerd. Like, that's, and I was not.
But I think that there's nothing nerdy about that. I mean, it's actually, you were sitting down doing your homework, and just such a nice kid, Well, I have to do my homework, and then I've learned my lines, and you always knew your lines, and you always knew it was just great to work with. Very professional.
Yeah, well, thanks. But yeah, anyway, so I got the leaving results. Then I think the following week, the book came out. Then we went to Ayia Napa on our 6th-year holiday. Then while I was in Ayia Napa, I got texts from the lovely woman who is in charge of publicity for the book to be like, good news, the book's just made number 1. Mm-hmm. Then got back from Ayia Napa and had a couple of weeks to kind of pack my bags and then moved to Cambridge. So It was kind of the most mental month ever, really.
Pretty incredible. And my book went to number 1 too.
Look at you, high five.
Mine was in the non-fiction charts.
Oh, good. That means we're not competing. I like
that. It doesn't quite. Oh God, no! I would never be competing with my daughter, but and I would never get 8 A1s. That's pretty incredible. So then Cambridge was amazing. You studied English?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I was, ironically, had I stayed in Ireland, my first choice was to go to Trinity to do English and maths. That was my my first choice, because I was always both those are my 2 favourite subjects, basically, and my 2 strongest subjects. But at Cambridge, you could only do 1. So yeah, I applied for English, and I couldn't believe I got in, and then I went, and yeah, it was pretty Cambridge is a pretty unique place. It's pretty bizarre. It really is very old school in many ways. And
come here, just in terms of women, is there any overhangs, when you say it's old school from a gender perspective?
English as a subject tends to be more women than men. So in terms of my classmates, there was a good gender balance that if anything, more women. And I was pretty lucky at the college I went to, because at Cambridge you have different colleges and you apply to a specific one. So I went to one called Gonville and Keys, which is one of the more old school ones. And I think it's the gender makeup of its professorial body probably isn't exactly the greatest. That being said, my director of studies, so the academic who was like specifically in charge of me and my kind of progression throughout the 3 years of my degree, was a young woman who had just been put into that role, and I think therefore had a lot to prove and was also just absolutely amazing. And she kind of made it her business to make sure that me and my classmates really succeeded. And honestly, like, she was incredible. And just seeing her, as I said, this young woman who was kind of surrounded by these old white men, and she was determined to succeed, and we kind of wanted to succeed almost to, like, you know, make her look good because she was incredible. And she so I owe a lot to her.
Isn't it amazing now, just so far since we've been talking, you know, you've mentioned two females who have, you know, helped and supported and championed you. It's kind of fantastic to hear that. You know, that does happen. Obviously it does happen, but also I think sometimes you know, the reverse happens, because we feel, sometimes women can feel there's only, you know, X number of spaces for women, and I've got mine, and you know, I'm not going to let you kind of threaten me, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I know what you mean. But she was kind of, and look, I was definitely, and this isn't me being modest, it was very daunting coming into Cambridge, not only because there were very few Irish there, like especially at undergrad level, just because obviously at that point, like, you know, university is basically free in Ireland, and it very much isn't in the UK. So you just didn't, like, I was the only kind of Irish undergrad that I knew, really. And also fundamentally because, you know, all the Brits had done the A-levels, so they had only done 3 subjects for their final exams, whereas I had done 8.
You did 8, which you didn't have to do. You only had to do 6.
Oh, yeah, it's good to have a spare and then another one for luck. So I was obviously, like, I was good at English, but I'd only devoted kind of 1/8 of my time to it. So in terms of, like, how much I had read or how much I was really playing catch up when I arrived. Like, I remember so clearly in my first week of lectures, like, one girl turning to me and being like, "How many Shakespeare plays have you read?" And I was like, I'm pretty sure we did 1 for the junior cert, 1 for the leaving. That's 2. And she was like, "Oh my God." And I was like, "Oh God." So yeah, I felt really, and I didn't do very well in my first year. Like, in my exams,
just by your standards, I'm sure you're just saying
like,
that.
I got a 2-2 at the end of my first year, which is obviously a Cambridge 2-2 is not awful, but as in I was like, okay. But as I said,
well, coming from 8 A1s, you know, I'm sure that kind of impacted on you.
But I was kind of, I was like, okay, that's where I'm at now. So, but then, you know, keep going. And then, as I said, in large part, thanks to the support of Dr. Bowman, as she was called. Then, you know, at the end of first year, at the end of second year, I managed to get a first, and then in my finals, I got a first as well. So
excellent. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. And what I wanted to ask you as well is, you said you were always a creative child from you know, the outset. And Cambridge, you know, were you involved, or did you have time to be involved in any of the footlights or any of the theatre work there? Or
funny. Like, I thought I would be more involved, to be honest. Like, so I remember I did a play in my first term, and it was very funny, actually. I met a lot of people doing that play in my first term who remain some of my closest friends today. So we had a very cast and crew. We had a good bunch, and it was so funny. Like, I remember playing, it was a David Hare play, and I remember playing the role of the Irish prostitute, and my parents came over to visit the weekend that the play was on, and my brother came, and my 3 best friends from home came. So they all came to see the play, and there was me on stage acting the role of the Irish prostitute, and I was like, why did I think this was a good idea? Anyway, and then I never did a play again. That was it. That's the last time I've actually acted, because I think at that point also, like, needless to say, Cambridge is seriously intense. Like, the terms are so,
it's just the time thing.
Like, you have to write at least an essay a week. It's non-stop. Like, I was suddenly in this new country with all these new friends, and, you know, so great, you know, bit of socializing as well, but the work was really full on. Also, fundamentally, I had another book under contract. So writing the next book alongside my Cambridge degree, alongside being homesick, alongside having a boyfriend, so all of that. So basically the acting took the backseat, and it hasn't really come back since. Yeah,
well, you're still young. We'll see what happens or where it goes. But I was the same, because I went to university after, as you sort of alluded to there, my character Tess was murdered by your father in the show. And then he kidnapped you guys. But I went to university afterwards, and I thought while I was studying for my undergrad degree that I would keep my acting up. But it's probably a bit like you as well. I would be very competitive, and I wanted to kind of get the best results I could. And I found myself that I actually didn't do any acting at all. I just focused on the studying and did pretty much. This is why I no offense to your real mum, but happily have you as my daughter. Yeah, I got first class honours every year and came first in class every year as well. But I kind of get where you're coming from on that as well. There's certain, I adored acting and loved acting, but then you get focused on something and you want to be the best at that. And plus I loved, my undergrad was psychology, so it's human behaviour, and then my PhD was in the Institute of Neuroscience, which is understanding the relationship between human behaviour and the brain. And to be honest, that's part of the reason I loved acting. I'm sure maybe you can kind of connect with that. It's about understanding why someone would behave in a particular way to be that character. You have to, it's not about the words. It's about, well, what's and motivation sounds like such an artsy thing, but actually that's what I mean genuinely, what is kind of going inside their brain that would cause them to act like that. But and that was something I was thinking about when I was reading about you and how you talked so you did book 1 and book 2 fairly close together, and while you're doing a degree, it's pretty incredible. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, around the time you were doing book 3, was it that people sort of started to describe you as a chick lit author?
Yeah, to be honest, I think that happened kind of straight away. God knows the cover of my first book is bright pink and has little hearts all over it, and I think I was described as the love child of Cecilia Hearn and Ross O'Carroll Kelly, which
it's not bad.
I kind of love as a thing. I wish that had followed me around. But yeah, the book was very much. The books were very much packaged and marketed as a specific type of book, and the chick lit genre was very much mentioned. And then the third book I wrote, and obviously the books thus far had been pretty autobiographical, and book 3 was no different really. It was all about an Irish girl who goes off to Cambridge to study, and then she and this is where the book is not autobiographical, she experiences, she's basically raped. And the book kind of deals with that. And that was a really interesting moment, because I remember writing that book and actually having to do quite a lot of research, as I said, because fortunately it's not something that I have firsthand experience of. And I worked with the kind of rape crisis centre in Dublin and did some interviews and stuff there.
I did counselling for them too.
Wow. Yeah, an amazing set of women there. And then I remember being sent the kind of proof copy, or the advanced copy of what the cover for book 3 was going to look like. And you could see that, it was bright and it had flowers on it. And I was just like, guys, no, come on. This is actually quite a dark book, and the subject matter deserves kind of respect and gravity and whatever. But they were just so eager that, I would continue to fit the mold of very kind of commercial, upbeat, coming of age, party books. So we wrangled a little bit on that and came up with something that was a kind of happy medium. But I think that was the point at which I started to realize, A, that I was interested maybe in starting to move away from the kinds of books that I'd written previously, and B, that my publishers weren't necessarily going to be delighted with me doing that. So basically what followed, and I don't talk about this very often, but I did actually write book number 4, and it was a complete disaster, because on the one hand I was interested in kind of moving away from that commercial mold and writing something more kind of research based and a bit more literary, or whatever you want to call it. My publishers really weren't, and I wanted to keep them happy, so I was trying to write this hybrid thing that was kind of neither one thing nor the other, and it was rubbish. And my editor read it and was like, "Oh, Ruth, we're not sure about this now." So basically what I ended up doing was saying, you know what, I think I need to take a step back here and figure out what it is I actually want to do. do.
And very, very mature. And I mean, I did read that, before I do these podcasts, I always feel like a stalker, but it's, it's kind of, well, no, it's important to kind of go and kind of get, whatever insights and find things that interest me. And that did jump out to me too, that, and I think it's an important lesson also for people to learn. And we all do it, is when you try to please everybody, sometimes it's you that actually kind of gets thrown out of the mix. And very fortunately, you were mature enough to realize, okay, well, I can't write what I want to write and please them. So I'm going to go and write what I want to write. Lots of people would go the other route, and I think it's so important because at the end of the day, finding something that you love is love and can lose yourself in is really the key to happiness and to satisfaction in a way in life, rather than and I mean, I get the sense that you would have felt that you weren't being true to yourself. I think one of the reasons I kind of raised that issue around the chick lit, and nothing wrong with chick lit or anything like that, this for me is more about an issue of you being able to follow, I don't usually use the term the gut, but follow where you wanted to go. You were growing, you wrote your first book at 16, you have different interests, and obviously sadly that interest in writing and the need to write about rape was as a consequence of rape culture, which sadly is still ongoing in universities and something that we need tackled more. But also there was the issue really around, I guess you can kind of call it a sexism of a sort, where, there was other young men writing books who weren't sort of put in a box, and their books were looked at for what they were. And I think even you mentioned in one interview about someone being nominated for a Man Booker Prize, who was along a similar time as you when you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm kind of, on the one hand, I appreciate that, like, the book that I wrote around that time, like, I'm not saying it was a work of like literary genius, but it did make me very, as you say, conscious to quite how gendered the industry is, and also just like there's a real snobbishness about different genres and different types of book, and as you say, unfortunately that falls along gender lines very often. What was most interesting to me, to be honest, is the way that people often invite me to talk about this kind of transition, I suppose, that I went on in retrospect. Like they're very keen for me to say something along the lines of, I used to write these kind of silly chick litty book, but then I took a break and now I write serious, proper literary fiction. And I really hate that, because I think, again, that is to say that, like, to say that someone like Marion Keyes isn't a genius is insane, because like her books are brilliant and so
I'm actually reading her Grown Ups at the moment, almost finished, and I mean they're fantastic, and the thing is, it's like saying one type of music is better than another type of music. These are, in a sense, I suppose, for our entertainment. I think they're hugely important actually at the moment, and in terms of self-isolating during COVID and all those times, but also aside from the current pandemic that we're living through, loneliness, is very detrimental to health, and books can help people hugely. You can find friends in a book as you read a book, and you can find yourself in a book. If somebody else is going through something similar, it can often sort of help with self-awareness or help you seek solutions. And I don't think it matters what the genre is.
No, and I think people who have, some of the character insights and the way that they are able to capture the nuance of social interaction and everyday existence is extraordinary. But because of the way that they get marketed and talked about and pigeonholed, they are, for many people, deemed somehow superior or further down on some bizarre literary hierarchy that exists. So as I said, I was really keen after the fact to make it clear that I didn't feel like I'd kind of graduated onto like a higher plane. I mean, to be honest, like, and as my mother also likes to point out, I will never sell as many copies of a book as I did when I wrote those earlier books. But for me, it was, as you said, it was partly, I'd grown up, I'd done a degree in English and then went on to do a couple more, and I read a lot, and I just found my taste changing, and it was just about doing something different, not something better, not something more serious, just different. And that was what I was interested in pursuing.
Well, that's what I was going to say about the authors of so-called chick lit, or whatever you want to call it, popular fiction. The laugh is on their side, because they make absolutely millions. performance. And the fact of the matter is there's a market there for it, is what people want. And I mean, I found that when I was, there's sort of a similar snobbery. I think that snobbery exists sort of in a lot of places. I mean, we would have felt it. I certainly, you mightn't have noticed it as a young teenager because you were kind of, kind of busy going through that sort of angst while you're on the TV. But I mean, I noticed it, that snobbery. Oh, you're a soap actor. Do you know what I mean? Like in a hierarchy, you'd be a theatre actor. Now, I never really particularly had, I'm fully trained as a theatre actor, but because my interest and motivation was understanding characters and creating it, TV appeals to me much more because it's not about the repeating the performance every night. It's about the understanding it and getting it right. So actually soap was fab for me. But also somehow that acting in soap is lesser. But actually, to be honest, to look good on soap, you actually have to be pretty exceptional because everything is done so quickly on such low budgets.
That's so true.
You have no music to tell the story. You watch any, movie, the music is telling you what to think, the lighting, the atmosphere. You have none of that. I mean, do you remember we'd be in the living room of our house where most of our scenes were, and you had what I'd call the 3 Daleks in front of you, which was 3 cameras that they never moved. And everything was shot at the one time. Your close-up plus your 3-angle wide shot plus your 2-shot. Now, if you're making a film, you have to kind of make quite your performance much, much smaller, for your close-up. And then it's different, for your wider shot. Yeah. And I mean, when you're on soap, there's no choice in that. And there's no, can I do it again? I wasn't happy. It's once the technical people are happy, that's it. That's a wrap, move on. And in fact, on the soap, when we worked on it, the teams used to have competitions who could finish the earliest each day.
Yeah. And also, remind me, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we were there when it went from 3 episodes to 4 episodes a week. So like the turnaround was just like insane. Like you're making 2 hours of telly a week, like from scratch.
Yeah. And I mean, for anybody not familiar, if you're working on film, you'd probably be lucky if you make a minute of film a day. If it's proper, kind of movie stuff, it's just entirely different.
Yeah, that's a really good parallel. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the snobbery also exists, I think, in academia, and I can only speak for myself here, in terms of, publications. It's certainly on the science end of things. I don't know how it works in the more literary side, but certainly in the science end, it's about publication in academic, in Nature and your H factor and all that sort of thing. And whereas for me, I want to have impact. I started very late in university. I'm never going to have hundreds and hundreds of academic papers, but I also found that wasn't my driver. My real driver is actually to take that science, to take that research, translate it, make it easy to understand so that people can be more proactive about their health, in my own case about their brain health, but also I talk about other issues, like, because that's what struck me when I was doing my PhD, was reading tons of literature and going, oh my God, they're risk factors for dementia. You could reduce those. And how come I don't know that? Or how come I don't know that you can boost the growth of the neurons in your brain? And then I realized nobody knew it, but yet there's been publications on them going back to the 80s. And, the information just wasn't breaking out from academic literature. And so that's where I found sort of my passion, and sort of probably a little bit in the reverse of you, I found my passion in saying, well, actually, I want to be accessible to the masses. It means more to me to do that than have a Nature publication. And so that's what I focus on. And I'm perfectly happy doing that. I love that, but I still think there's a snobbery. And actually also within universities, there's no real recognition of that. So for promotion, it's around, well, how many publications, how many this, how many that, but nothing about the impact. Having said that, in fairness, the university gave me an award. The provost gave me an award for the impact of my work. But in the regular sort of scheme of things, there isn't.
For now, that's all we have time for, but Ruth and I continue our chat in next week's episode. My name is Sabina Brennan, and you've been listening to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Superbrain on Apple, Spotify, Google, Acast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, if you loved it, rate it, review it, and share it.